This died down in intensity, but was followed by a continual strain and continual violations of the ceasefire along the lines as established during the fall of 1965. The Soviet Union, for the benefit of those listeners who may not recall this fact, extended, perhaps for the first time that one remembers, its offices of mediator to two non-communist countries, India and Pakistan, and the Tashkent meeting was arranged. What led to Mr. Shastri's acceptance to go to Tashkent?
Well, the basic issue according to the Pakistanis was the Kashmir issue. The Indian position is well known. A nation doesn't go on holding plebiscites in parts of its territory. Any more talk of plebiscite in Kashmir is to India a second partition of our country, and no Indian can agree to this kind of thing. Nonetheless, not only the Soviet Union, but many people, both in America and in England and many other friendly countries, continue to talk that there must be an amicable settlement of all disputes. I think there's nothing wrong in trying to find out, probe, discover if there are solutions, because the arbitrament of arms is not the best way of resolving differences between nations. We preached it, we believed in it, and therefore India was always ready to find an amicable and peaceful solution to her differences with Pakistan. But may I make a little thing? I wouldn't like to be very critical of Pakistan. It won't be fair since there is no Pakistani to reply to me right now. But the basic issue is not alone Kashmir. Tashkent would not be a great success because the basic issue is not at all Kashmir. There is the simple fact, here is a parliamentary democracy in India. There is, excuse my saying, a religious apartheid according to the constitution of Pakistan, and therefore the conflict is a little bigger. But we don't believe in imposing our kind, our way of government on anybody. We wish the Pakistanis well, and we do believe that in the long run the relationship between India and Pakistan will have to be of mutual trust, friendship and cooperation. This is the background, and since we always believed that all disputes and quarrels and disagreements should be resolved at the negotiating table and not with the bayonet, Mr. Shastri readily agreed. It was the Pakistani leader who first hesitated and then very reluctantly agreed. But the Indian reaction was very quick and prompt.
Well, now, an agreement, and I use that word perhaps in quotation marks, an agreement was said to have been reached at Tashkent. There was a communique, there was a published statement. Some said there might not be, and some people hailed this as a victory both for Prime Minister Shastri and for President Ayub. How would you assess what actually occurred at Tashkent?
Well, Mr. Krauss, I should frankly say that I have a varied and mixed reaction to this communique and to this so-called agreement. So far as there is an agreement not to use force to resolve disputes, I welcome it. So far as there is an agreement not to interfere in one another's internal affairs, which Pakistan has guaranteed, I welcome it. Why do I welcome it? Because she tried to resolve the dispute over Kashmir by force and also by interfering by sending infiltrators. Here I am quoting the relevant documents and resolutions of the United Nations. To this extent, I am happy about. But regarding this withdrawal, I have some reservations. So far as withdrawals are concerned, I wouldn't like to see an Indian soldier on an inch of Pakistani territory. It's not done, it's not to be done, and it's wrong. And we would like to the Pakistanis who are in part of Indian territory also to go back. But I am not quite sure that India, till Pakistan finally accepts the present position with regard to Kashmir, should agree to give up those strategic routes in the valley of Kashmir, which the Indians liberated in August. To the extent that the 5th of August means giving up of Kargil and Hajipir, the two routes through which Pakistan periodically sends what she calls liberators, what the United Nations calls infiltrators, and what the Indian people call invaders. The giving of this is not a thing that will be conducive to peace.
Well, now the interim Prime Minister, Mr. Nanda, the former Home Secretary, who was also the interim Prime Minister, acting Prime Minister prior to the election of Mr. Shastri, indicated that he will support the Tashkent agreements. Do you foresee a political struggle over these agreements in the Indian Parliament when you return?
I think the resentment over this part of it, and not the whole of it, there was no resentment at the Russian and Mr. Koshygin's dedicated effort to bring about a settlement, but there is strong disappointment and bitter resentment at this part about the withdrawals. Mr. Nanda, we can of course expect as a successor to Mr. Shastri and as a good man that he is bound by the obligations, the stipulations, the commitments of his predecessor. That is fair and correct. But so far as the people of India are concerned, this strong resentment is tempered by their deep grief at the loss of a very popular man, Mr. Shastri. I think the resentment would have erupted in more emphatic forms of expression had it not been accompanied with the announcement of Mr. Shastri's death.
So that, in a sense, he might not have returned as triumphantly as some might have predicted had he lived.
Well, he had a way of persuading his people. His sincerity and patriotism were not in doubt, and his stature, because he chose to defend India alone and unequivocally when the threat to India's integrity came from China and Pakistan in August. He could have gone and made the people perhaps removed, but I personally think it would not have been an easy task even for him, because we don't understand how, unless Pakistan permanently signs a no-war pact with us, giving to her strategic posts and once again opening ourselves to her tender mercies is a thing likely to recommend. But if you know the spirit which Mr. Shastri referred to and Mr. Ayub Khan also mentioned, General Ayub Khan, is to prevail, then there can always be a give and take. But first thing is this mutual conviction that we shall not and we mustn't resort to arms to settle our disputes. And may I say, I hope you will not think I'm unduly patriotic, never India believes in the use of the sword and the bayonet except when forced to defend herself, as China forced her repeatedly. Even at Tashkent, the ugly shadow of China was present. On the last day, the Chinese ultimatum came, accusing India of aggression against China. And you know what a cock and bull story it is.
Mr. Pai, before our time runs out, I wonder if you could comment briefly about Mr. Nanda, who is now the Prime Minister, whom some say the Congress Party might conceivably elect as the permanent Prime Minister's successor to Mr. Shastri. What kind of background does he have?
It is the privilege of the ruling party, in this case the Congress, to choose their leader. I have had the privilege of knowing him when I was a boy of 17 and we were lodged in the same Hindalgarh jail in Belgaum in 1943. I was a young university student and Mr. Nanda was already a veteran minister. He is a man of great simplicity and again a man of honesty. I don't always agree about the things he says or does, but I would never deny him his sincerity. He is a man who is in very good health in spite of fairly advanced age because of his austere Spartan type of life, deeply dedicated to the main problem of the India of today, the uplift of our common man, the eradication of poverty, lifting India from the quagmire of misery as a result of generations of foreign rule, and giving every Indian a decent standard of living. In this, Mr. Nanda is a modernist, but he is aware that the even greater task is that to create a welfare India is possible only in a free India, and the defense of India will have to take precedence over everything else because we are challenged, confronted, threatened from all over borders, particularly by China and her ally.
Mr. Pai, who other than Mr. Nanda is conceivable in your judgment to achieve the position of Prime Minister if he
It
should
would
not
be
be elected?
arrogating to me a right which doesn't. Had it been left to my party, I would. It should be for the congressmen. It would not be fair to show any kind of preference. And I would always also only hope, I would only say, that we'll be very much more be interested in the policies than in the individuals, though I have known, as I told you, Mr. Nanda very intimately, and I think very highly of his honesty and some of his other personal traits. But my judgment will be best not on the individual, but the policies the new Congress Prime Minister will follow vis-a-vis in the context in relation to the myriad problems India is facing at home and abroad.
Do you foresee that there would be any major change if any of the individuals whose names have been mentioned were to become the permanent Prime Minister?
You know, this has been one of these eternal debates, whether Carlyle was right in saying it is the hero who makes the nation, the history, or the other philosophy that events make the man. I think the truth lies in between. Mr. Nanda, I think, be broadly following the policies of his party, but there is the inevitable imprint, the impact, the emphasis of the given individual. Mr. Shastri claimed to be following the policies of Pandit Nehru, but you know how different they looked. The same may be happening. Mr. Nanda honestly may try to carry the policies, but policies again have got to be adopted to changing times. The India of 1966 January and after Tashkent is not the same as the India with which Mr. Shastri, and so Mr. Nanda will have, I think, to evolve policies which will meet the requirements and the needs of the time in which he is the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Nath Pai, I'm very, very delighted that you were able to come and visit with us today, and I sincerely appreciate your taking time just prior to a hasty trip to the United Nations and to continue your work there on the subject of discrimination. Perhaps before you return to India, we might have another chance to talk about the work that you're doing at the United Nations. Our guest today on Report from New York was Mr. Nath Pai, a member of the Indian Parliament here in New York City for a visit to the United Nations. My name is Mitchell Krause for Report from New York.
This has been Report from New York. Join us next week at this time for another program devoted to background and analysis on major developments and personalities in the news. Report from New York, a presentation of the News and Special Events Department of Radio New York Worldwide.